again, when you look at that consequential moment that happened in Georgia on January 5th, I think that upped the expectations and that upped the ante on President Biden. I do think that all of the kind of breathiness around Joe Manchin aside, there's a lot of accomplishments to count. Well, I think President Biden was maybe being a bit exaggerated with how he was playing for the press conferences. That's what presidents do, but there's a lot to count on that COVID package, which was to you look at the child care, that was a part of that. Infrastructure bill. With the recognized judges for there's actually I actually think the modern presidency is set up to let people manage their expectations. 2009, President Obama was there, and despite the fact that we had historic gains, we really could not convince people that that was progress that they were. I think the same thing is happening there.
Let's talk about voting rights in particular. The president said people of color are going to vote in the upcoming midterm elections, even if Democrats, can't pass the laws, which they couldn't.
I think the president has been about a half step off on the messaging on the for a while. I believe the administration has out you can't outworganize the pressure. And that is in a democratic case. When you hear the president and his allies talk about, well, we just have to show up, we have to vote them out of office and take back the power. A lot of black voters, really just black voters in general, who kind of believe in these rights, feel like, hey, in the middle of a pandemic, show up with record numbers. We gave you the presidency by 8 million votes. We gave you the Senate. We gave you the House. We did the hard work. We did our part. And I think that's what President Biden has to worry about is 2022 and potentially in 2024 if he runs for re-election. You have asked voters, and in some cases we're talking about black voters here, to kind of go out and vote. There's no payoff in that. I think in that type of situation.
So
is 2020 elevate some of the things that maybe did not get headlines or maybe get lost in the sauce. What you're going to do with Build Back Better, being maybe broken up into a couple smaller pieces. Focus on getting that agenda over the hump in the next. President Biden was Vice President Biden 12 years ago, and I think he remembers maybe the missteps of the Obama presidency and his allies not selling the Affordable Care Act the way that they could. They actually turned into a political albatross as opposed to a political and so I think you're going to, it's pretty quickly the legislative board and sales vote, and hope that you can at least wave off record student losses. Last thing I say, Arun, is I think sometimes we forget presidents, even in the best of times, they are going to lose in the first two years. That is just that is and I think even under the best of times, I think President Biden is going to have a hard time holding on to
COVID, we are actually out of this latest variant, this latest wave. Is that a winnable issue, or is it just kind of being people take for granted that, yes, you're supposed to fix something like a huge health crisis?
Yeah, Arun, and it's funny, we haven't spent much time on COVID. I guess quickly what I would say is COVID is a thing that has taken down one presidency, and it could very well take down a second. It's the reason why Joe Biden is president, and I think it's the one thing that can't be defeated at the ballot box. I think the president and his team have to wrap their arms around this.
Yes or no, is he going to run again?
I think right now, President Biden has set the expectation that he is going to run again. But there are a lot of things that can happen between now and the next 18 months, which is about the window we would have to decide to do that.
Joel, Democratic Strategies, host of podcast Here Comes the Pain, and CBS News political contributor. Thanks so much for joining us, Joel.
Thank you, Arun.
The Takeaway is supported by Indeed. With Instant Match. BetterHelp Online Counseling. BetterHelp, connecting people with a therapist in a private online environment for issues like depression, anxiety, and relationships. 17,000 therapists are available through BetterHelp using a computer or smartphone. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public.
Supporting WHYY, the Philadelphia Orchestra. Mussorgsky's colorful masterpiece, Pictures from an Exhibition, will be featured January 28th and 29th at Verizon Hall. Conductor Danielle Restioni leads the Philadelphia Orchestra in a program that also includes Beethoven's Leonore Overture, and Principal Viola Chunjing Chang performs Kei Chia Chen's Passionate, The Desires. Tickets at philorg.org or 215-893-1999.
Hey everyone, I'm Arun Vandergopal in for Melissa Harris Perry today. This month, a law went into effect in New York City. It maybe sounds like a game changer for immigrant rights activists. It grants roughly 800,000 immigrants the right to vote in local city elections. Mayor Eric Adams initially expressed some skepticism over allowing non-citizens who had lived in the city for just 30 days to be covered under the measure. But ultimately, he chose not to veto the bill. Here he is speaking about it with CNN's Jake Tapper earlier this month.
In New York City, just Brooklyn, for example, 47% of nice people live in Brooklyn as a bar president. And the imperative is that people who are in the municipality have the right to decide who's going to govern them. And I support the overall concept of that.
But again, while this feels like a moment legislation, Democrats have not been outspoken about it at the national level, even as their inaction over federal voting rights has dominated Washington, D.C. this month. Part of the reason why congressional Democrats and the White House are not cheering on the measure may be over concerns that it can lead to conservative backlash in other parts of the country, areas where immigrant rights don't have the same level of support. Russell Berman is a staff writer at The Atlantic covering politics, and he recently wrote about the new law.
New York is an immigrant city, and so especially in New York City where unfortunately voter turnout is fairly low, so even a modest increase in voting in certain districts, especially in Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx, could have a big impact on city council races and other local offices. So that was something that was raised in the debate. It has caused some tension, particularly with African Americans who worry. I mean, there was the Democratic Majority Leader of the City Council, Lori Cumbo, voted against it because she suggested that non-citizens would dilute the vote of Black New Yorkers. It should have an impact in New York if it is upheld by the courts.
So this is a big deal, obviously, not just because it's New York of all cities that's doing it, but because it's relatively rare in this country. But that wasn't the case earlier in American history, correct?
That's right. For the first half of American history, in most states, non-citizens could vote in certain elections. Now, obviously, there are a lot of people who should have been citizens who were not allowed to vote during that period of time. But only in the last really 100 years or so has it been, really out of the mainstream. I think the last state to change its laws to ban non-citizens from voting was in the early part of the 20th century.
Right, and so now we have a situation where these local Democrats have pushed through this law, but you have a lot of, ambivalence higher up the chain, don't you, from, say, congressional Democrats who generally have not been particularly vocal.
That's right. I think it's been very interesting that, if you look at it in one way, we're having this big national debate about voting rights, and this is perhaps the largest expansion of voting rights by numbers that we've seen in some time, and you hear really nothing about it from the National Democratic Party. President Biden hasn't talked about it. Even powerful Democrats in New York, like Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, have had very little, if anything, to say about it. Even staunch advocates in the city for immigrant rights, like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has not talked about it. Part of the reason, obviously, is that this only impacts local elections in New York City, so it wouldn't change the balance of power in Albany or in Washington in any way. But you can see how, just the fact that they haven't talked about it signals that this is just a debate that they're not ready to have.
And how do you explain that?
Well, just look at the politicization of immigration policy over the last decade, 2 decades. you have Republicans who are quite willing to talk about this because they think this is a winning issue for them, even though it's only occurring in New York City, only local elections. They are, one that filed a lawsuit for Republican National Republicans in New York to stop this, but they want to, use it to attack Democrats in congressional races by saying, look, this is the future that liberals want. This is, if they get power, they are going to non-citizens the right to vote. They're going to dilute the vote of your vote. If you're a citizen, and they're going to try to do that nationally, even though obviously, as I mentioned, there's no indication that they want to.
There are pro-immigrant advocates who argue that this law wouldn't just hurt the Democratic Party, but it could hurt immigrants themselves. How so?
Well, there are a couple of concerns that were raised to me. One is this, in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level, this issue has been stalled in Congress for many years. So what you have is a bifurcated policy, a polarization in which the blue states and blue cities are trying to expand rights for immigrants, both undocumented and legal permanent residents, and you have red states that are restricting those rights. You have laws like the one we saw several years ago in Arizona, the so-called "Show Me Your Papers" law. And the concern here is that, in this sort of tit-for-tat battle that is playing out in states and cities, the further that New York City goes, to the left on this issue, you're going to see Republicans in states like Arizona or Florida or North Carolina or any of these states where they really control power. They are going to respond, and retaliate essentially by passing laws that restrict rights for immigrants, and those are in places where these immigrants do not have the political power that they do in New York. The other concern locally in New York that could become a national issue is that the implementation of this matter. So, it's going to be up to the New York City Board of Elections, which is not an institution renowned for administrative competence, as we've seen in the recent past. They are going to, have to implement this law. They're going to have to, in some cases, when there's, when you have years that where there's local elections on the ballot as well as state and federal elections, they're going to have to print separate ballots for non-citizens, and they're going to have to make sure that non-citizens only vote in those local elections. And if even unwittingly, non-citizens, because of confusion or because of mistakes, if they unwittingly vote in an election that they're not legally able to vote in, that's a crime, and they could be subject to deportation. And so, one advocate said, are we sending these people in to commit crimes because, not through necessarily any fault of their own, but if poll workers don't know the law, if the Board of Elections messes this up, then, of course, if that happens on any mass scale, it's going to add fuel to the fire of the Republican argument that really is not based in fact, but this argument about voter fraud.